Hey there! Today we'll run through some info on graphic novels. Sometimes graphic novels are called comic books, sometimes they're called manga, but essentially, they're novels with graphics. Go figure! One of the earliest texts that influenced graphic novels is William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. To print these texts, Blake used corrosive acids on copper plates to create the text and very detailed pictures. Then the copper plates were used to transfer onto the copies. It was a super slow process, and I think it says a lot for a man who felt like the Industrial Revolution killed art by making it so mass-produced. He created an elaborate mythology that he produced on paper through this printing process. The Adventures of Obadiah Oldbuck is considered the oldest comic book. It's really funny and worth a Google. There's a copy through the dartmouth.edu website. The dedication of the book reads, "Wherein are duly set forth the crosses, chagrins, calamities, checks, chills, changes, and circummigrations by which his courtship was attended, showing also the issue of his suit and espousal to his lady love." And the novel reminds me a lot of those Spot and Jane readers from preschool. But, I mean, look at that synopsis. How is that not very funny? Around 1950, we get the first graphic novel. It rhymes with lust. At this point, graphic novels seem to be focused towards a very specific demographic. And by 1966, we have the first famous graphic novel character, the Silver Surfer. Since then, graphic novels have kind of exploded. Graphic novels also have their own regularly used literary devices. Catachresis is like 70 times more intense than a metaphor. Some examples. Henry M. Jackson stated that the development of the hydrogen bomb placed us on a knife edge of history. While effectively presenting the danger, the risk, the fear appropriate to that situation, him saying that it put us on the knife edge of history is much more intense than Juliet is the sun, just a regular metaphor. Dialect is pretty straightforward. Read The Book Thief and you'll pick up some interesting German language. Read Huckleberry Finn and you'll learn some old school Southern dialect. But mixed metaphors are really, really fun, and they often happen on accident. So while most people end up saying mixed metaphors on accident, a lot of authors will include them intentionally to create some comic relief or maybe just see if you're paying attention. But this list has an example of some. If you'll look at these up here in the top, we'll burn that bridge when we come to it. It's a mixed metaphor. It's mixing the phrase "we'll cross that bridge when we get to it" with "don't burn bridges," or watch out for burning your bridges. Another one that I hear a lot is "it's not exactly rocket surgery." Yeah, you can look at those for a minute. They're funny. Juxtaposition is a favorite of mine. It's used to make a clear distinction between two opposing forces or objects. The juxtaposition of old and new is one of my favorites. Old cities will bear beautiful old churches, but when you step back and look at the skyline, you see skyscrapers and modern development framing this beautiful old church. Advertising often provides some of the best accidental juxtaposition. Imagine you're on a highway and you come across two billboards, one stacked right on top of the other one. The top one is a public service announcement about childhood obesity, and the bottom one is an advertisement for McDonald's. When intentionally used, the author is proposing some form of change to be made between the two extremes, but as an English geek, it's just really fun to find accidental examples of juxtaposition and laugh at it. The next common literary term or literary device that's used is the concept of a frame story. A frame story is where you have an inner storyline progressing inside of an outer story. Think of the movie Elf. Elf begins with Papa Elf explaining that Buddy was always different. Then we watch the movie about Buddy the Elf and learn that he really isn't an elf. The actual movie plotline is the inner story, but the intro and the conclusion of the film has Papa Elf talking and framing the story. That is the frame of that story. Leidities are essentially understatement for emphasis. You downplay something to emphasize how important it really is. Really good examples You won't be sorry means that you're going to be really, really glad, and it isn't bad means it's actually pretty good. We use them all the time, and I think that most of us recognize that we're using some form of figurative language, and now you know what it's called. Lighties. Metafiction is like Inception. It's when fiction will make, or the characters inside of a fiction story will make some kind of comment about being in a story. Or it happens in movies, like especially comedies and stuff like that. They'll look at the camera and, make a comment. Allegory will become a really important concept for you to understand as we're reading Mouse. An allegory is essentially a story with two levels of meaning. There's the storyline, which on its own makes sense, and it's a story. But when you look a little bit deeper, everything is symbolic for something else, something more abstract. In Mouse, we have the story of some mice who are being harassed by some cats, but when we look a little bit deeper, we realize it's the Jews being harassed by the Nazi Party. So now we're going to take a second to talk about anthropomorphism, pathetic fallacy, and personification. Personification is an umbrella term, and there are different types of things that fall under it with their own names. Anthropomorphism is typically giving human characteristics to animals. I make my dog talk all the time, and I'll often translate for other people what she's saying and thinking. She'll walk up to someone and I'll say, well, hey, can you give me something to eat? Because I'm real hungry today. Even though none of that crap's probably true, she's not thinking that at all. It's just fun, and we all do it. Pathetic fallacy is when we give awareness to non-human things, like how at work, when the copy machine is acting up, I talk to it all nice and I pet it a little, just in case it understands. And the last literary element that we're going to talk about is dealing with metaphors, or more specifically, extended metaphors. Extended metaphors are used throughout Mouse. We talked about extended metaphors, or Homeric or epic similes, when we were reading the Odyssey. It's a comparison that goes on for several lines. Well, in Mouse, which is a graphic novel, the comparison goes on throughout the entire novel. The Jews are represented as mice, the Germans as cats, the Poles as pigs, the Americans are dogs, the Roma are gypsy moths, the French are frogs, the Swedes are reindeer, and the British are fish. And if you'll do a little bit of research, like a Wikipedia bit of research on some of the different things here, you'll probably be able to see why the author chose to represent each group as that thing. As you read, you're tasked to make note of these different literary elements throughout the novels. Consider what makes their use so effective and what result comes from it. So time to recap. Graphic novels are nothing new. The authors of graphic novels might not appreciate their books being called comic books. I consider that to be the equivalent of people calling folk music country music. Nothing's wrong with either, but they just aren't the same. Graphic novels tend to use some particular literary devices. Having pictures provided for you increases the challenge for the author to create a literary text, but the author will or should manage to do so. There should still be quotes that sing to you, imagery built into the language. To further add to the challenge, the illustrations serve as a literary device on their own. They provide juxtaposition, and in the case of Mouse, they continue the extended metaphor. A truly skilled graphic novelist will have both striking text and striking illustrations, and still allow for particular moments to resonate within your own mind. So I hope that gave you a really good background for graphic novels, and I really hope that you enjoy the texts.